All right, so get ready because today we're going to be diving into some pretty heavy stuff.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about uh, are we humans actually hardwired to just like destroy ourselves?
hmm
That is the question. And to help us unpack it, we are taking excerpts from Mann's book, Sapience, The Moment Is Now.
Okay.
And we're specifically looking at two chapters, The Fall and Multis Don't Suffer.
Wow, those sound pretty intense.
Yeah, and they are, the book itself, it's fiction, but
Yeah.
it paints this very plausible picture of what the world could be like in the 2050s to 2070s
Okay.
with climate change just completely out of control.
Interesting.
Man doesn't hold back at all.
Right.
He really drops us right into this world where governments have basically just abandoned any promises they made about, reducing emissions and stuff.
Oh, wow.
And so everyone is left trying to survive on their own.
So it's like every man for himself kind of thing.
Basically, yeah. And it really makes you
Right.
think about all those international agreements and pledges, were they ever really meant to last?
That's a great point. You know, Mann compares those pledges to perennial flowers.
Interesting.
Pretty to look at, but ultimately not built to last.
And when you think about it, haven't we seen this happen in our own time?
Totally.
Like we make agreements, set these big targets, and then, well, nothing really changes.
Yeah, it's like we're reading the first few chapters of this book play out in real life, which is kind of scary.
It is pretty unnerving.
There's this one example in the book that really stood out to me, the town of Brainerd.
Yeah, Brainerd.
It's this small community that manages to actually hold itself together when everything else is falling apart.
Right.
And the reason they survive is because of their strong community bonds.
It's like they have each other's backs no matter what.
Exactly. And that raises the question, how important are our own communities going to be when things get tough?
Yeah. Could you rely on your neighbors if everything went sideways?
It makes you think, right?
It definitely does.
It's like looking at the social fabric of our own lives and asking, how strong is it, really? But Mann doesn't just stop at describing this collapse.
Right.
He digs deeper, asking why. Why did all those efforts to stop climate change fail so badly?
And what's the answer?
Well, it's not exactly comforting, he argues, that those voluntary pledges, they were doomed from the start.
How so?
Because no one was really held accountable. There were no real consequences for inaction.
So it was like this giant game of hot potato, but with the fate of the planet at stake.
Exactly. No one wanted to be left holding the potato when the music stopped.
And that leads to an even bigger and frankly more disturbing question.
Which is?
Is this failure, is it rooted in something even deeper, like in the very DNA of civilization itself?
Whoa, that's a big one.
Yeah, and that's what Mann is getting at. He argues that civilizations are almost programmed to just produce more and more and more.
Okay.
Like it's this biological imperative, almost like an animal's need to eat.
It's interesting because he connects this back to something we all hear about all the time, GDP.
Right, the measure of a country's success.
But Mann argues that GDP is actually a trap.
A trap. How so?
Because it keeps us locked in this cycle of endless growth, this idea that more is always better, even if it's destroying the planet in the process.
It's like we're stuck on this runaway train and nobody knows how to apply the brakes.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then Mann throws in another curveball, this concept of multis, short for multinational corporations.
Ah, okay.
And he doesn't paint a pretty picture of them.
No, he doesn't. He portrays them as these massive, powerful entities that actually thrive on chaos and uncertainty.
So the worse things get, the better it is for them.
Well, yeah, kind of. They see opportunity in crisis, like sharks smelling blood in the water.
So basically they profit off of our suffering.
In a nutshell, yes.
But isn't it a bit simplistic to say that all corporations are like this?
Sure, there are definitely companies out there trying to do good, but Mann raises an important question. Do even those companies with good intentions, do they have a moral responsibility that goes beyond just making a profit?
Especially when their actions can have such a huge impact on the planet and everyone on it.
Right, and if we're not careful, who ends up paying the price for their actions?
Yeah, it's usually the people who can least afford it.
Exactly, the poorest are always hit first and hardest. But eventually, even the wealthy can't escape the consequences.
It's like nobody's immune to the impacts of climate change, no matter how rich or powerful they are.
Right, and Mann drives that point home with this really vivid image of luxury homes in Beverly Hills and Paradise Cove being destroyed by rising sea levels.
Yeah, those iconic places just swallowed up by the ocean.
It's a powerful image, and it makes you wonder, Are we already seeing these same disparities play out in our world today?
I think we are. I mean, just look at how climate change is already disproportionately affecting marginalized communities all over the world.
Yeah.
It's like this slow motion disaster that's already unfolding, and it's only going to get worse.
It's a sobering thought for sure. Yeah, it really makes you think, like, are we on this path to self-destruction? You know?
It's like, is this our fate?
Hmm.
To just keep consuming and producing until there's nothing left.
And the thing is, it's not just some far-off dystopian fantasy. It's like we're seeing the early signs of it right now.
Totally. I mean, you see it in the widening gap between the rich and poor, the way we're obsessed with economic growth, no matter the cost.
Right, and the growing influence that corporations have in our
It's
lives.
like, are we just sleepwalking into this disaster?
Well, I think Mann is trying to wake us up. He's not sugarcoating anything, but he's also not saying that all hope is lost.
Right. He's not saying it's inevitable.
Exactly. He's holding up a mirror to our present and saying, look, this is where we could end up if we don't change course.
It's a warning, but it's also a challenge. Like, what are we going to do about it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to be honest, Mann doesn't offer any easy answers.
Yeah, there's no magic bullet.
But by painting such a vivid picture of the potential consequences, he's forcing us to confront the issue head on, you know?
Right. It's like he's saying, okay, here's the mess we've created. Now it's your turn to figure out how to clean it up.
It's a call to action for sure.
I remember this one line in the book that really struck me. It wasn't the climate that needed changing. It was human consciousness.
That's powerful.
It's like he's saying that we need a fundamental shift in our values and priorities.
Right, like a collective awakening.
But how do you even begin to change the consciousness of an entire civilization? It feels almost impossible.
It's a massive undertaking, no doubt. But think about the major shifts that have happened throughout history, like the abolition of slavery, the fight for civil rights, the rise of environmentalism.
You're saying those were all movements that fundamentally changed the way people thought and acted?
Exactly, and those changes didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of effort, a lot of struggle, but they show that profound change is possible.
So you're saying it's not about giving up hope.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that change is possible, but it requires collective effort.
Absolutely. It's about being willing to challenge the status quo and actually imagine a different future, a better future.
And it can't just be a few individuals. It has to be a movement.
Right, it has to be a collective effort.
So Mann's book, it's not just a warning, it's also an invitation
An invitation to what?
to imagine and create a better world, a more sustainable world.
It's like he's saying, okay, here's the potential mess we've created, but now it's your turn to figure out how to clean it up.
He's definitely given me a lot to think about. What about you? What are your big takeaways?
For me, it's a reminder that we still have a choice. We can choose to continue down this path of destruction, or we can choose a different path, one that prioritizes sustainability and well-being for everyone.
It's like we're standing at a fork in the road, and the path we choose will determine the fate of generations to come.
And we can't afford to wait for governments or corporations to lead the way.
We have to start making changes ourselves, in our own lives, in our communities.
It's about taking responsibility for our shared future.
Right, exactly. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff, like governments failing and corporations profiting off of, well, the planet falling apart.
That's a lot to process.
It really is. But before we wrap up, I want to get your final thoughts on Mann's message. Like, if you could pick one thing you want people to take away from this book, what would it be?
That's a tough one, but I think if I had to pick just one thing, it would be this. We need to rethink what progress actually means, you know?
Okay.
Like, for so long, we've been told that progress equals more stuff, bigger, faster, shinier.
Yeah, the whole more is always better kind of thing.
Right, but look where that's gotten us, right? To the brink of ecological disaster.
Yeah.
So I think Mann is saying we need a new definition of progress, one that's not about material wealth, but about, well-being, sustainability, creating a world where everyone can thrive.
So it's not just about consuming less, but about changing our values, like how we see success.
Exactly. It's about understanding that true progress isn't about having more, it's about living better,
Yeah. And creating a world that's actually sustainable for future generations.
Absolutely.
Going through these excerpts, I have to admit it's a bit bleak.
Yeah.
But I also feel like there's a glimmer of hope in there too. Like, it's not too late.
Right. I think Mann is saying that we still have a choice. We can choose to change course.
It's not game over yet.
Not at all.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Sapience, I want to leave our listeners with one final question to ponder. If if civilizations are really driven by this need to just produce, 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 can we redirect that drive, toward something more sustainable? Or is the fall, as Mann describes it, just like inevitable?
That's a question we all have to wrestle with, and there's no easy answer, but I think having these conversations is a good start.
Yeah, questioning the status quo, being willing to imagine a different future.
Exactly. It's about choosing hope over despair, action over apathy.
That's a great way to put it. And for our listeners out there, if you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend checking out D-Man's book, Sapience, The Moment Is Now.
It's a challenging read, but definitely worth it.
It really makes you think about the choices we're making today and how they'll shape the world of tomorrow.
And who knows, it might just inspire you to be part of the solution.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Sapience. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and let's all work together to create a better future for everyone.